Chapter 7, Secret Love. Dogan Ronda. Lamare's carefully braided tresses swayed as she walked towards the palace gates. Her eyes revealed great concern, and her aura contrasted with the warm weather outside. For the love of gods, I didn't understand why Lamare had to so tightly clutch the scroll that she was delivering to the emperor against her chest. "Lady Lamare," I said, bowing. "I'll escort you to the emperor." She jerked when she heard me speak, but she managed to nod at me. As she turned around, I faintly got a whiff of the lavender scent that she was wearing. If only I were braver, I would have told her how I felt for her. I was a tall man with broad shoulders. I didn't have a pretty face. Mine had battle scars that told my history. I swayed when I walked to cover the limp from a long-forgotten war. I was not a pleasant sight, to say the least, which was why no matter how fierce I was in battle, I couldn't draw up the courage to tell Lamare that I liked her. Liked her enough to be willing to abandon my soldiering in the Canellan Palace should she ask me to spend my days with her in that little cottage of hers together with her son Kino. But all of these were daydreams inside my head. Now, Kino was different. He had seen 12 moon turns, yet no power manifested in him. I usually see him alone at the trading market or with his fat friend. I felt for Kino because, despite my massive body, my power didn't suit me either. I wished the gods had been kinder and had given me a better power, one I could use in wars. I prayed the same for Lamare's son, who had nothing to show altogether. Not even one so impotent that the child could use, at least to register for citizenship at the Akea wine festival. Sometimes I feel embarrassed about knowing too much about their lives, but I couldn't help it because I want to get closer to them. From the corner of my eye, I peered at the scroll Lamare was holding. The material used, the paper, was the same as what she always used on the other scrolls she brought to the emperor. It had a dark brown tinge and looked brittle as though it would crumble. We all had distinct quirks, but I still found it odd that the emperors were to have stories written for him. For entertainment, I suppose. But if that was the purpose, why didn't he hire a court bard? At least then, the fun would be shared by many. The emperor received the scroll personally, and what was written on it was never read out loud. Maybe it was such a beautiful story. Perhaps a love story of sorts. Or a political strategy. That was why when the emperor read it, I had to stand guard to ensure he would not be disturbed. But why all the secrecy? Well, if I were the emperor, I would have been ashamed to be found inside the chamber reading a sappy love story I forced a beautiful maiden to write. Just the thought is ridiculous. Although if it were political strategies, I wouldn't want anybody in the palace to know. I guess I would have liked to think it was the latter that Lamare was writing about. Whenever the emperor read the scroll, Lamare would sit a few yards across him where, from my position, I could see her visibly shaking. Today, I noticed that her shoulders were stiffer than usual. Her face was held high as if inviting trouble. If she tilted her chin any higher, I was afraid she would not see where she was walking to and trip. No sooner had the thought entered my head when Lamare stumbled, pitching forward. Oops. I moved forward to catch Lamare, but my damned leg prevented me from reaching her quickly enough. I should have this knee healed, I told myself. She lay sprawled across the floor, shocked and trembling like a child as she scrambled to stand up. I offered my hand. She looked up at me before taking it. "Are you all right?" "Yes. I apologize for the trouble," she said hastily as she gathered the scroll. The ribbon fastening the scroll loosened when she slipped, and it sprawled out in front of us like a brown carpet against the palace's marble floors. It was long, maybe 2 to 3 yards. I never gave it much thought that the story could be so unusually lengthy. "Let me," I said as I briskly walked towards the end of the scroll. I didn't intend to read it, but I saw the last line. I shrugged it off. It merely said that Kino is as he always is, never a citizen of Akea. What? Well, he's still young to be presented for citizenship anyway. And although I don't think it's a fitting ending to any story, apparently, the emperor believes otherwise because he keeps asking Lamare to come back with her stories. "Please, don't touch the scroll," Lamare said, her voice shaking. I almost pitied her. She seemed disturbed by the thought that I could have read parts of her story. "No, it's nothing. Let me help." I was halfway through rolling the scroll back up when my eyes caught sight of a few lines foretelling a huge flood in Dirella, the province where I came from. My hands froze, but my eyes skimmed the rest of the sentences. Dirella will suffer from flood for 4 days until aid comes from the palace. Lives will be saved, but many lives will also be lost in the process. I didn't get to read any more of it because Lamare pulled at the scroll, and I felt ashamed for having read a part of the story meant only for the eyes of the emperor. She bent beside me as she took the scroll away. I was gazing into her eyes, and immediately, the flood in Dirella, the lives lost, flitted from my mind. At that moment, all I could think of was how delightful it must have been to kiss her. That is, if I wanted to frighten her more than she already was. So instead, I smiled at her. "Forgive me, Lady Lamare. Here you go," I said, handing her the scroll. "It's all right. It was an accident," she said. Her other hand smoothened over her skirt, straightening it as she stood up. We made our way towards the chambers where the Emperor was waiting. "That's quite a long story you wrote, Dirella, the flood. I wish I could read more," I said casually. Lamare turned to look at me, her mouth gaping. In an instant, she regained her composure, pursed her lips, and started walking faster. "You did not see anything." "Apologies, my lady." "Why so? Is it forbidden?" "No. It's just that, you can't tell anybody about what you've read." "Don't worry about it. It was nothing. I think you're a talented writer even if I only glimpsed a little." I didn't get to finish what I was about to say because her slight frame shoved me, pinning me against a wall in the hallway. The scroll was thrust up to my chin like a knife. I was shocked yet equally amused that all I could do was stare at her beautiful eyes. "Please promise me you won't tell a soul about the incident. That I slipped, and you saw what was written in the scroll." If this were a love story, I would have ended up kissing the woman of my dreams. Only, in love stories, the protagonist usually has a handsome face. Oh, but I was sorely tempted to kiss her. Lamare was so tiny compared to my comparatively gigantic body. And here she was, coercing me to promise not to tell. If I so much as flicked my finger, I could have sent her tumbling across the hall. The thought was so amusing that instead of answering her, I roared with laughter. It was throaty, and the sound that I made rumbled along the corridors. Gods, even the sound that I made was horrendous. Lamare stepped back. "Please promise me, Dogan," she said meekly this time. I opened my eyes and stopped laughing. She knew my name. She actually knew my name. "Yes. I promise," was my enthusiastic response. Then she turned away from me and walked towards the large, wooden door to the Emperor's chambers. Even though I was heavy, I felt like I was floating in the air after her. For my hideous face, for all the ugliness that I had, nothing seemed to matter at the moment, and it was because Lamare knew my name. The two-syllable word that left her mouth touched not only my ears but also my heart. Her charms, even more, took me. I swear, I would do anything to make her happy. My face broke into a grin, and I didn't care if all of my stained teeth showed.